Hi, I'm Anthony Newbold. Welcome to Closer Look. My guest this week is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honourable Peter Turnquest. Minister, Mr. Deputy, welcome to the show again.
Thank you, Ace.
You're preparing for the mid-year budget presentation. You have a firm grip on where we are right now after Dorian?
Indeed, in as much as one can have a grip in these kind of circumstances. But certainly we have a pretty good outlook on where we are. The first half of the year has performed surprisingly above what we had expected as a result of this storm.
First half of the year, meaning 2019.
2019, correct.
Yeah.
So the year begins in July.
In July, yeah.
So July to December has actually performed a little bit better than we had anticipated.
Okay.
We are slightly ahead of last year, same time compared. And that has a lot to do with the tourism sector, which is doing very, very well,
right.
Thankfully. And everything else is more or less stable. We have lost significant production in the two affected islands.
Right.
But what we've seen through tourism is that we didn't lose the count, that those people who might have ordinarily gone to those two islands have shifted to other points in the Bahamas. And so it's been relatively stable in that regard.
Yeah. What will the deficit look like now compared to what you expected it to be?
Right. So we had originally anticipated that we would have met our 1% deficit to GDP target for fiscal year 1920. And we were well on our way towards achieving that. Unfortunately, as a result of Dorian, we are anticipating now to have a deficit of $677 million, as opposed to what we had originally projected of $137 million. So we're going from the projected 1% now to 5.3%, as a result of the loss of revenue and tax revenue, as well as the increased cost to address the challenges that arise as a result of the hurricane.
The mid-year budget debate is on the 12th?
Yes.
15th?
Correct, on the 12th, I think it is, yes.
How do you replace that income from Dorian?
So the reality is that the total effect of Hurricane Dorian is pegged at some $3.4 billion. Out of that, $232 million is anticipated to be the lost revenue from taxes during that period because of the concessions that we're giving in those two islands in particular. So we have to replace that. In addition to that, we're anticipating that expenditure itself will increase. I think it's $157 million as a result of this storm, to address social needs as well as infrastructure needs, putting the government services back in place, et cetera. So we can do one of two things. We can either tax to try and fill that hole, or we can borrow. To tax would put additional burden on the Bahamian people and on the economy when it is most vulnerable. Obviously, that is not an answer. And so we have to look towards how the government can borrow these funds or otherwise acquire these funds to be able to address the challenge. You might recall that we had a pledge conference just recently to try and offset some. We've had tremendous participation from non-governmental organizations, both domestic and international, who have done tremendous work in helping us to fill some of this gap. But it still leaves a deficit. And so the only way, or the most palatable way to deal with this is to, unfortunately, borrow.
And you got to borrow, understandable, I think. But how much you have to borrow at this time is a question.
So we're anticipating a borrowing of $507 million. And again, we are at the ministry managing that very, very carefully. A point to note is that because we get the borrowing resolution, meaning the approval from Parliament to borrow $507 million, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go out and borrow $507 million.
Right, which was really my question.
Yeah.
You may need eventually $500 million, but you don't have to borrow $500 million this fiscal year.
Absolutely not. Exactly. So the way that we approach it is we want to be as conservative as possible, give ourselves the headroom
Yeah.
in the event that something happens, some project arises, whenever you're doing this kind of rebuilding, things happen and contingencies happen. So we want to have the headroom to be able to do it. But our hope and our plan is to manage this reconstruction so carefully that we wring out the fat and we deal with what needs to be done rather than just going on a spending spree because we have the headroom to do it. Two, we are very mindful that we're heading into another hurricane season very shortly.
Yes.
And so, it would be foolhardy of us to use up all of our headroom now, not knowing what the next season will be.
Yeah.
So our aim is to come in under that number. And so as we progress in the reconstruction is how we will draw down on that borrowing resolution.
Yeah, whatever the resolution
Yeah, and so
says.
we might not, at the end of the year, hopefully, we don't need the whole 500.
Yeah.
But we'll see how that goes along as we engage the projects.